morning. We're going to do a little bit of a disconnect from the usual that has been part of my channel for a while, where we do address issues about the YouTube community. In other words, usual troll activity and so forth. And we're going to try to get back on a path here to talking about topics that really matter and how it does pertain actually to a lot of YouTubers. And in general, basically, foreigners that move here to the Philippines, some with pre-existing health conditions and so forth. But we're going to cover something that you might find very informative on here. And I think all our shows from now on is going to be totally informative. It's not just going to be about the Philippines, but in general, issues that really have to do with all of us, whether you're the Philippines or otherwise. There's been a lot of controversy over exercise programs and people trying to get their 20,000 steps in. But one leading heart surgeon who believes that exercise is not going to really address weight issues. Now, here on YouTube, many are familiar with a lot of the players on here. Overall, a lot of the foreigners that come to the Philippines are clinically obese, and that leads to a lot of metabolic, and that's where the health issues. This one, and I'm going to have a clip that I'm going to play here anyway, audibly. There's a show I listen to. We'll give the name of that show, which is really very informative. And this man has guests on here all the time that are professionals that are highly rated in their field, and I get a lot of my information sometimes from this show. And these are not just ordinary guests he has on his show. These are people that are top rated in their profession, and they talk about all kinds of different health issues. A lot of us feel that we're out of control with our lives when it comes to their health, because one of the things we're not paying attention to is the obesity is not necessarily an issue because of lack of exercise, but it is actually an issue of their diet. On my show a lot, I try to touch upon these issues a lot. The old saying that you are what you eat is so true, actually. And I'm not too much different than a lot of people. Well, I am in many ways, but I think in this community, in YouTube, and the foreigners that move here in a place called the Philippines where I'm residing, and so are you, if you're listening to me, more likely, or you're planning to live in the Philippines, or you do visit the Philippines, or you plan to retire here. And one of the biggest mistakes I think that people are making out here is they're moving out here with pre-existing health conditions, which are conditions that should be handled well before they actually make a move out here, because we understand the medical system out here, and a lot of people don't have the money to pay for any catastrophic situations that might happen while you're out here. And it's not the best idea to move out here if you really qualify for these conditions that should be met head on well before you ever move here. So in other words, take care of your problems before you move here. If you have any really serious health problems here, it'd probably be to your benefit. Now, obesity is horrible, especially when children, 1/3 of children are considered obese. That's pretty whack, isn't it? One of the problems is diet, and that's the key factor here. The factor of diet. Now, I'm guilty of myself of not always having the perfect diet. I just came back from shopping from Cebu, and of course, we had a walnut apple cake we brought back. I brought back some hamburgers, double cheese hamburgers from SNR, and they brought back 2 large pizzas. Of course, I dined on the pizzas. While I was in Cebu, I was also going to a place such as Sabaros, which has some really good food, and it was highly caloric and highly saturated fat, cholesterol, such as things like pasta with Alfredo sauce and pizza and everything else that we had out there. There are not many really good, healthy restaurants in the Philippines, which gives the direction we're heading here to not only the state of bad health with Filipinos and why a lot of them die premature deaths, because their culture is basically, we're going to eat what's on the table, and that's what the children eat all the time too. Obviously, don't eat. And their diets are usually a lot of rice, which is, starch, it's carbohydrates. It's not complex carbohydrates, it's carbohydrates, which basically you eat the carbohydrates loaded with starch, which turns to sugars, turns to calories, turns to fat. And a lot of the diet here in the Philippines is fried food. Now, they're not using good oils like virgin olive oil. They're using basically some kind of a vegetable oil, which is not very conducive to yes, very shocking on the prices, Becca. It really is. So we're changing things around too here. And I'm trying to pay more attention to my diet because what happens is, you buy this stuff, you paid a lot of money for it, you're going to eat it. Let's face it, I'm going to eat it. I'm going to have a piece of that apple walnut pie probably today. There still is a couple of hamburgers we brought over, and likely I'm probably going to eat them. Now, a lot of people are thinking that exercise is the answer to everything. Metabolic health comes from many directions. We say metabolic, which is basically it's encompassing all the organs in your body and how they work together and how you can affect every one of these organs. Now, if you're unfortunate to have, for example, diabetes, if you don't put that under control, it's a dire thing because the diabetes can affect all the metabolic function in your body as well as the liver. And what you put into your body is so vitally important that um, it'll determine your longevity, determine your state of health, your comfort within your own body that you have to walk around with every single day. Most I've seen here, for example, on YouTube, for example, we could use that as an example. The ones that I've actually seen, they're all obese. They're all clinically obese. And we're not going to name names on here because we're not doing a troll show here, but I'm basically saying something that could benefit these people rather than saying, I don't care how fat they are, I hope they die and all that, I'll never have trouble with them again. I could look in that direction and I could go there and I could actually say that. Okay, so people have given me trouble on YouTube before. I just think in my mind, I said, look at their condition right now. They're not going to live very long. And I would be correct to say that for numerous people that's here on YouTube. But in general, as a nation, as a world, not just country, obesity has basically been the biggest plague of human civilization. And you talk about the old days of bubonic plague and Spanish flu and everything else going on. If you really want to get current with that thought, today's biggest problem is obesity. Now, you will see our children are obese because they're taking the same diets and habits as their parents are, and they wind up being just like their parents. I've lived in Hawaii, as many people know, and obesity is massive there. I've seen young children that look like, well, I can really compare it to what do we call that? Sumo wrestler. Okay, the best I could. They had legs that were so big, and ankles, and thighs, and bellies, and they're walking with their parents hand in hand. And wouldn't you know that the parent that's holding the hand of that child is rather extraordinarily obese. And with that being said, that was a visual that I had. No matter where I went, actually, whether it was back in Seattle, I noticed a big change for the last time I've ever been there. And I've noticed that I went into stores, I went to clinics, and I've seen all these people that were extraordinarily obese. Seemed to be the common denominator of the people that I've seen. And I'm going to play a clip from this doctor here so you can listen to it. Whether I get a strike on that or not, it doesn't matter. I think I'm trying to help you out. I'd like you to listen to just a little bit of what this guy's saying. Now, by the way, the show that I occasionally listen to is called Azur Lane. It's Azur. Next word is Lane, Lane. This is the number one heart surgeon in cardio. Says it's a waste of time for weight loss. It's having to do with cardio. But let's listen to it, a little clip of what he has to say.
You're not just giving advice, right? As a medical profession, you're also giving medicine. What's your perspective on medicine, and how has that evolved as you've learned more about what I guess you define as medicine?
Well, he's going to give a story here. I hope that's coming up. Where the biggest challenge in his career, 20 years as a heart specialist, is when he had to operate for 10 hours on just a 38-year-old woman who was clinically obese. And he felt that she'd be alive today and be with her children. The hardest thing you had to do is to tell the little children that your mom's no longer here. And that's a hard thing to have to go tell as a doctor somebody's family that a 38-year-old that could be alive today and everything she's done that she did alive could have been preventative. Now, one of the things here that is really affecting the mortality of people is high blood pressure. High blood pressure can tear apart aortic valves. It can do all kinds of stuff when you have high blood pressure. And this woman could have been saved, and she'd be alive today, enjoying her children. But this the arteriosclerosis happens to all of us. It's just a matter to what degree. So if you're, for your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever, you have a lot of natural atherosclerosis, and what that basically is you're getting plaque and everything else in your arteries that's building up. Just picture a plumbing pipe, and you put a lot of shit down that drain, and eventually it adheres to the pipe lining, and then that crud kind of builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up. That's what actually happens, and eventually there becomes a clog and you can no longer get the water flow in there. And that's actually happens with people's arteries and whatnot. And you build up plaque. Plaque could even come from the plaque in your mouth if you don't really have good hygienic practices with mouth washing and plaque removal. But of course, it comes from a lot from your foods. Um, so let's listen what this guy had to say here on this to kind of enlighten you what he's all about and see what he has to say.
As you've learned more about what I guess you define as metabolic health?
Yeah, I think my view now is that medicines should be necessary a lot less often than we use them. When we look at our health, we shouldn't really have the baseline assumption that we have today that if someone's in poor health, it's because they're lacking medicine. It's because we haven't figured out the right treatment for them. Usually pharmaceutical-based treatments, maybe it's going to be a procedure or surgery. But there's almost a sort of assumption built into that, that the human body is destined to become ill, that we're destined to develop these problems, and that the only way that we are going to be able to manage and head off these problems is by advancing science, by coming up with more pharmaceuticals and more surgeries to treat the problems, instead of considering the fact that it might be something we are doing to ourselves.
There's a book in front of me that says Stay Off My Operating Table by Philip Ovadia. Why did you decide to write this book? What was your mission?
Yeah, I wrote the book because I struggled to find this information. I, as a heart surgeon, I, as a doctor, I, as someone in the medical system that is supposed to be built around making people healthy and keeping people healthy, struggled to figure out the information that's in that book.
When you say healthy, what is healthy? Like, how does a doctor like you characterize health?
So I define health today as our bodies working the way they should. I talk about metabolic health in the book. And the way that I define metabolic health is that our bodies are properly utilizing the inputs that we are giving it. And the primary input that we give our bodies is the food that we eat. And so when we eat, one of three things is really supposed to happen to that food. Some of it gets turned immediately into energy for us to fuel all of the activities throughout our day. Some of it gets broken down so that we can build and rebuild the tissues in our bodies, processes that are always going on. And then a little of it is supposed to be stored for times when energy is not available. And what has happened in our modern environment is that system has broken down. And we end up storing too much of the energy, and we end up not being able to ever use that stored energy. And that has